With a ruling from Judge Liman expected any moment now on Wayfarer's motion for summary judgment and motion for judgment on pleadings, I've had something in the back of my mind all along about what's unique about this case in terms of its ability to perhaps really challenge some long-standing unhealthy power dynamics in Hollywood. And I just thought I'd sit down and share that with you here quickly now. It's kind of a rare opportunity that these different parties coming together right now at this time presents in order to just challenge some of these things. And one perspective as a producer of 30 years plus that wanted to also share that if you look at how this unfolded, I'm pretty certain that there are a few key miscalculations that Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds and her team may have made in filing this lawsuit, things that they never saw coming. It's my guess that they would have expected things to play out much differently based on how things normally do play out. And instead, what they've discovered with Justin and Jamey and the Wayfarer parties probably shocked them and left them scrambling. Well, this is just my opinion, of course, and based on everything that I've read and how I've seen other things play out in the past. And although personally, as I've said before, I think Wayfarer would be better off taking all of this all the way to trial at this point in terms of their own reputation and clear vindication, I do think there's a very real possibility, again, my opinion, I'm not a judge, that the majority, at least some, if not all, of Blake's claims could get tossed out. So, first I wanted to stop and consider some things. I thought, dawned on me, I wanted to be on the lookout for reaction to his rulings, whatever they might be. And it's actually maybe kind of a fun and perhaps illuminating way to look at that. Hi, I'm Michelle, and welcome to the Spotlight Shift. I really appreciate you checking out my channel, and for those of you who've subscribed, thank you for participating already. And for other creators out there, I just have to ask, has everyone had a period where you get your pausing and recording backwards and then play back to discover there's a whole lot of you sitting doing nothing and you've lost a big chunk of the recording? Well, that's the portion you are participating in from here till, I don't know, quite a ways forward. Anyhow, we'll try to whip through this and I'll organize myself. So anyway, thinking about the rulings that we expect from Judge Liman, it got me thinking about one of the big rulings from him early on in this case that got a lot of people really riled up, me included, and that is when he dismissed Wayfarer's case. And so that got me thinking, like, what this ruling is coming out, and it's a lot of the same people, same evidence, only more of it. There's a lot of parallels, even though the claims are different that he's ruling on. So I started thinking, how would it look to compare what Lively's team said, at the time that the case was dismissed against Wayfarer, against if they were to use any of that same language or perspective if any of their claims get tossed. So I just thought we'd rewind for a second and compare some of those things. So we're just talking about reactions and framing here, obviously, not the exact claims, and they're not exactly the same, but there are some good comparisons and ways of looking at it that we can just consider here for fun, looking at just being the flip side. So let's look at what it would be like. Okay, so Wayfarer's case is dismissed, and this is the statement that comes out from Ezra Hudson and Mike Gottlieb. This dismissal is a complete vindication of Blake Lively. From day one, we said that Wayfarer's lawsuit was baseless and retaliatory, and the court agreed. We are grateful the truth has prevailed and will continue to defend Ms. Lively against any remaining claims. That latter part, those further claims weren't filed in terms of an amended complaint at the time. We'll see about an appeal. So pretty strong language here, right? Complete vindication. The court agrees. It's all been baseless and retaliatory. So that's not just a we won motion. That's like we were right all along, and this was all baseless. So yeah, do you think any of that could be said of Wayfarer if some of Lively's claims get tossed? I don't know. It's just framing that matters. Certainly when you come out with a statement like this, it lands with the public right away. I'm sure there's people that heard that at the time and just, it does sound pretty strong. So, it's all about framing and PR and all of that. So here we go. We're just going to take a look at Wayfarer's response. If I get this right, we will. And these are, they made slightly different statements depending on the source. So this is the basic collection coming from Friedman and the gang. This court's ruling, again, this is when Wayfarer was dismissed way back. Who knows when you're maybe watching or listening to this and if the judge's rulings have come out yet on Wayfarer's motions. So Wayfarer said back then, the court's ruling was based on procedural grounds, not on the merits of the claims. We respectfully disagree with the court's decision and are evaluating our options going forward. This ruling does not address the underlying facts which we continue to stand by. So yeah, we look at the flip side of all this, and I'm curious to see how much, with any rulings that potentially go against Blake in this case, whether they will continue to talk about the truth prevailing in court, or whether we might see more language like this that came from Wayfarer. I noticed that, the winners tend to claim complete vindication. It's the truth prevailing, whereas when you lose, it's procedural grounds, and the truth still will prevail. So yeah, it's I think maybe this isn't uncommon. Perhaps it's common language used by attorneys in terms of framing wins and losses, but it's something all of us get to pay a little bit closer attention to now, especially when we have these two rulings with all the same people and lots of evidence, not exactly the same people, but a lot of the same people and evidence, just more evidence now. And in terms of just recognizing media and framing patterns, I think it's really relevant that we get to see all this. And because it's Hollywood, it's getting a lot more attention, and we can see it on a public scale. So when you win, it's all broad and victorious, and when you lose, you narrow it down to some procedural things. And I happen to believe that Wayfarer was probably restrained in this language. I guess they were still considering appealing, but I agree with their statements here. But I'm curious to see how common it is when the rulings go the other way on the other side. So, and I don't know how often that ever comes about, where we have to such close comparisons that will be in the public eye, and for those of us paying attention to things like this kind of framing, will have. So I thought others might be interested in considering this too as we look ahead to whatever comes out in the coming days. So, and now for just, a real laugh, because you can have so much fun with these statements, especially if you're kind of a nerdy geek like me and also getting punch drunk because we're having to redo this all hours later, this weird chunk. Let's take a look at this comparison. Okay, here's a comparison side by side. We've got Ezra and Mike Gottlieb again, the dismissal, complete vindication of Blake Lively. Day 1, we said Wayfarer's lawsuit was baseless and retaliatory, and the court agreed. Now, I would argue for those of us who think the same is that language actually accurately represents maybe how we feel about Blake Lively's lawsuit. Do we just insert a new name here and use the same language, or could we imagine, I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to hear Ezra, Hudson, and Mike Gottlieb speak so highly of the court and the truth of any decisions, if any come out against them. So, and I just find it amusing, and it'll be interesting to see how the phrases and tone and sort of the framing of it all can be flipped one side to the other depending on what comes out. And as an aside, given the SH allegations, I also, in my opinion, expect we might hear some language about this being evidence, if that gets tossed from Blake's claims, that this could be seen as some evidence of the law still having a long way to go to protect women, and that Lively will continue to pursue justice on behalf of other women, etc., etc. So just my opinion on that. But so this case, this is one of the reasons I really wanted to start this channel, because, we're using a setting that I'm familiar with and material, and also just the media framing and showing how even legal issues cross over and PR, and also just the absurdity of, if you take these statements of face value and then consider had the decisions gone the other way. And that leads me to the other topic for today that has been on my mind, and something else I wanted that's just stood out in my brain since, especially since reading Wayfarer's initial filings, in terms of thinking of Blake and Ryan, of course, deciding to file this case and then seeing Wayfarer's response. I just I think there's a few basics they assumed going into it that prove not to be true, that go counter to how things normally go in Hollywood. And so I thought it was worth pointing those out. And that's aside from the other issue that we're not getting into in any big detail here today. And that leads to the other basic topic for today, and that relates not to the merits of the claim, but more the decision to file this lawsuit, and some things that, based on how things normally go, I'm assuming probably took Blake and Ryan completely by surprise. They kind of fall into a few basic categories, and that's just also beyond, I'm kind of agree with what lots of people I've heard, I think, also believe that perhaps they never really intended to sue to begin with. But jumping over that argument for now, just the decision to go ahead with this lawsuit, I think there are some basics of how business is done that are very interesting to see challenged here in a way that probably wouldn't happen elsewhere. First of all, assuming that probably even if they did file, it would never go to trial because of some of these factors I wanted to go over, and that, however far it would go, that they were pretty guaranteed to prevail. Again, because of some of these key assumptions that I would guess they might have made, and that Wayfarer is now challenging and caught them off guard. And there's probably lots of things, but these are the ones that stood out in my mind, specifically coming from the industry, and just a couple of the global assumptions on human behavior in general that I find kind of personally rewarding to see being played out and looked at here as we consider just some of our operating behaviors in society. And I don't have any, fortunately, any good slides or graphics for you here for this section. If you know me, that was just be going too far. We're already into the middle of the night as per my norm, it seems, by the time I get this together. But I did just throw together some of the headlines about what a splash this case made for a little visual variety while we go through this, and maybe give my eyes a bit of a break from the camera. So, but these are big. My first point here is a big global miscalculation that I think I just really like, just the whole idea of this particular idea being challenged. Okay, in my little view here, miscalculation number one. The first miscalculation is a prevailing belief, and what I expect many in the industry believe, is that kindness equals weakness. Yeah, I think that kindness is often perceived as weakness, and that's a fallacy that's pretty pervasive and a cultural thing. And sometimes it does play out that way because it can be hard to stand up if that gives fuel to the fire of those who seek to harm you. But it's just wrong that if someone is not quick to anger, or they are willing to keep working with you, or deal with you kindly, or maybe don't fight over every item. And as we can imagine, I believe that a lot of people feel that way. And in the case of Lively v. Wayfarer and Baldoni, I have a feeling they kind of saw Wayfarer as weak, Justin and Jamey as weak, and therefore basically as spineless pushovers. But as you can see by these particular headlines, when Wayfarer came back, I have a feeling that that might have shocked them quite a bit. And in my challenge to this idea that kindness equals weakness, and why I just really enjoy seeing the strength with which Wayfarer has come out and fought facts against facts here, is that in fact, in my opinion, sometimes this kind of kindness isn't an indication of being a pushover at all. In fact, you're sometimes just demonstrating the greatest strength of all to behave that way. And like I say, I think Wayfarer might have been perceived as just easy to walk right over. But they didn't fold. They fought back. And I don't think that was expected. And the second miscalculation, or incorrect assumption, is that wealth, power, and celebrity make you untouchable. I mean, it often seems that way, right? I've been there, where you know the battle is lost before it's even begun if you're the little guy, so you just cut your losses rather than fight back. It's almost just a manner of how business is done sometimes. So Ryan Reynolds, in addition to being very wealthy, he's regarded as one of the most influential people in Hollywood. And Wayfarer Studios, in comparison, was a relative newcomer on the scene. And Lively certainly came out all guns blazing with their legal team and savvy PR, and that kind of power is often incredibly intimidating. Now, even if Lively knew Steve Sorowitz was a billionaire, in the Hollywood ecosystem, there's still kind of this belief that the power of celebrity and savviness with PR can be assumed to just trump everything, overcome anything, even if it's a sort of an underlying unspoken belief. Often you get into that ecosystem and well, it works. And I guess people haven't seen enough challenges to it or the ability to challenge it. And there's also the saying, which I think is often true, is that the super wealthy don't get where they are by being quick to risk their own money on anything, let alone go all in on something like this. So something this personal and defending themselves and their colleagues, no matter the cost, rather than deciding everything based on a cost-benefit analysis, would not be assumed. In this case, that would have been a pretty significant miscalculation. And again, don't think they saw someone like Steve Sorowitz and his determination coming. What they ran into wasn't just money and the decision to spend whatever it took to fight this thing. Part B of that equation is personal support. They all had a lot of personal support for each other, from each other, and from strong families behind them. They support each other as humans, not just because of being on the same team. And that kind of financial and emotional backing is rare. It shouldn't be so rare, but it is. And it can make all the difference, really. Okay, third miscalculation, and this one is kind of funny, or has been striking me as quite amusing, specifically coming from this industry. This might be slightly unique, but it has made me laugh from the start. And that's there's bound to be something assumption. And what I mean by that, I think, because I think most people, if we're being honest, would feel pretty uncomfortable imagining their own emails or texts being picked apart publicly like this, especially in the middle of a conflict and perhaps some regrettable words that might appear in your correspondence that could be used against you. People vent, they exaggerate, they say things in the moment, usually. That's normal. Now multiply that by about 100 in Hollywood. As you've seen, people can be pretty free and colorful about their complaints and opinions. I mean, they're not all as extreme as some of the ones we've seen in this case, but you get the gist. And I imagine there's degrees of that everywhere in most businesses. So I imagine anyone planning a suit against anyone else in these kind of scenarios would expect that somewhere there's got to be material you can use to cut and paste and make someone look bad. And don't forget, Blake Lively, people in the entertainment business come from a storytelling mindset and they know the power of editing. But in this case, they sure didn't end up with much to work with. Surely they'd be thinking there's somewhere enough to shape the narrative they want, and even if they weren't seeing some full-on attack and rude comments that they would expect you could twist pretty much anything. I mean, there's a lot of conflict on this set, so there was bound to be something, right? Well, quite the opposite. Jamey and Justin are routinely, this is what was making me laugh as I'd read these texts, they're routinely telling their team not to say anything negative about Blake. And that's during whatever the supposed smear campaign time was. But this goes way beyond that. I'm even talking about back to, during production, well, in prep, and when all this conflict first started, I'm sure they assumed there'd be some negative comments that could be pieced together to be labeled as gender bias or something like that. But as more and more gets revealed, and there's still just very, very little to even try to scrape and twist. I mean, when one of the harshest things, and this is between Jamey and Justin and the Wayfarer gang, during production and between themselves and their personal comments, and yet about as harsh as it got, which actually made me laugh, was Jamey at one point when, some behavior where Blake was getting all the accolades and attention and kind of spinning things to her favor and basically leaving them in the dust. And Jamey says, "I'm happy for Blake. Let her get the accolades," or something like that. I can't remember it exactly. He says, "I just wish she'd share some of the credit with us." Now, who's ever considered that to be the angriest outburst in a scenario like that? I'm happy for Blake. Oh man, I'm sure that a whole group of people who sincerely make it a point not to say anything negative about anyone, anywhere, anytime, was not on Lively's bingo card when she decided to sue. It's pretty incredible, really. I mean, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find many productions where, even including personal messages between the producer and director, on any production with conflicts, anything close to this, where that would be the case. So stepping back and looking at this together, I think what stood out to me on that front isn't so much what happened, it's what no one expected wouldn't happen, and the expectations of how they probably assumed things would go shaped probably the decisions to go ahead and sue. And I wanted to share my thinking on that, coming from the stuff I've lived through and seen, and how things normally operate. So as we sit here holding our breath, waiting for Judge Liman's rulings on these motions and what that may indicate about the future going forward, I just think that no matter what he rules, there's a whole fascinating angle about how it's going to be presented. The reactions, I should say, will be presented. The language, the framing, that will be fascinating to see, and thought I'd bring that to the discussion here today and to look ahead towards that. And like I say, just overall, I find this case so fascinating right from the start because of just some of these long-standing norms about how business is done in Hollywood and actually just largely in our culture in general. Who has influence and power and what's seen as strength. It's just, I think all those things deserve a good challenge, and this is a nice shiny glitzy look at some of it. And of course with Hollywood, a lot of it's taken to extremes, so it's a great opportunity to examine some of these themes. So if you've been following along with my channel, I really appreciate you being here. There's lots more to come as all of this unfolds, and the next phase will be interesting, and we'll be getting right back into more information on producing and some other, this story and others in the media. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing, liking, or hyping at the new thing that I've learned about. I just, your participation and support genuinely help a lot. And I'm very thankful for that. And always enjoy your comments and questions. So thanks. See you soon.